Hi everyone, Eric Adams here again. You might have caught my first video about Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 a few weeks ago, in which I laid out its potential as a planning tool for photographers, filmmakers, visual artists, travelers, adventurers, and more. And if not, check it out via the link in the description below. That video focused on how to use it to explore areas you'll be shooting in, gauge their weather and lighting, and experiment with different compositions all the way down to ground level. And I'm following up today to dig in a little deeper into a specific capability within that use that Flight Simulator provides that's equally impactful for a lot of these folks. That is, its ability to accurately model the Milky Way, the sun, and the moon, as shown here. These are, of course, frequent targets for photographers. There are shooters out there who focus almost exclusively on Milky Way photography, placing stunning natural features or buildings and things like that in the foreground and using lots of complex shooting, compositing, and editing techniques to get what they're after. In the case of the sun, well, that's something that's a uniquely critical presence in outdoor creative work in good ways and bad. It can cue up amazing scenes and significantly impact the quality and feel of your work, or it can stymie efforts by being present when you don't want it to be, or not present when you do. It can cast unwanted shadows or offer really narrow windows of opportunity for great photography and filmmaking. The moon is also a favorite subject, and even it can impact your lighting and shadows when shooting at night. Now, for any of these, knowing their placement is incredibly important, but until now, for the most part, you've had to stitch information together from a variety of apps and other tools, as well as your own imagination and memory, in order to compose a shot in your mind and then go out and hopefully achieve what you're trying to do. Visualizing compositions also assumes you have some knowledge of the environment you'll be shooting in, something that's not always the case. If you're traveling through an area and only have a limited time in the region to capture something special, or if you're on a production and have crew considerations and budget and time constraints, you better know what you're dealing with before you arrive on location. This is where Flight Simulator proves itself to be a truly next-level, game-changing resource for visual artists. Now, as I described in my earlier video, this new flight simulator is just that, a flight sim for pilots and aviation enthusiasts, but it has this inherent capability that's only partially mined by the program itself for the alternative uses that I'm talking about in these videos. And it's this: it allows you to position yourself anywhere in the world with accurate scenery, accurate weather modeling based on your inputs, and accurate sun and moon positions, and hyper-accurate lighting from all sources, including reflections, diffusions from weather and clouds and rain, as well as shadows cast by buildings, mountains, clouds, etc. It's uncanny how good this thing is and how important of a tool it could be for people like us. My first video unpacks its benefit as photography planning tool by exploring how you can compose images before going on location to find the best angles, viewing spots, locations, and the impact of the light and weather on the scene. Much of the access to these capabilities comes from tools embedded in the program, such as the slew mode that allows you to whip your virtual airplane around at high speed to different places, and then the drone mode that allows you to separate yourself from your aircraft and explore at a more deliberate pace all the way down to ground level. In drone mode, you also have the key advantage of being able to control the camera by adjusting zoom, depth of field, and exposure. And I think you can see where I'm going with this in terms of the Milky Way and the sun and the moon. First though, for people who aren't pilots and think that this will be too difficult to use or too annoying or not something they consider, please again check out my first video in which I explain a lot of this a bit more, like how to actually use it. The bottom line is that this is a $60 program that can run effectively on most modern PCs, desktops or laptops, but sorry, not on Macs, unfortunately. And it affords users unprecedented, completely global world simulation capabilities from the ground to the sky, day and night, and in any weather conditions, etc. And there are ways to use this that don't involve having to do things like monitor your airspeed or your angle attack or any of that other airplane stuff. So let's look at this tool's capabilities with regards to the Milky Way simulation and the solar and the lunar modeling. Now, photographers trying to figure out the Milky Way's position will typically use planetarium software like StarWalk 2 and Sky Safari Pro, and planning apps like the Photographer's Ephemeris or PhotoPills to determine sunrise and sunset locations, and the same for the moon. Some of these apps will even tell you whether the area you're targeting will be in shadow from the sun or not at certain times. But none of those tools will simulate the actual photographic compositions. That is, the specific terrain and buildings, their relative positions, how those positions change as you move around, the shadows and reflections they cast, etc. Nor do they reveal how locations are impacted by the lighting, such as how severe the shadows will be at different times of day, and what the nuances are between light and dark and day and night. Golden hour, as you know, is a time-critical window in which your conditions change by the minute and often by the second. And you have to be ready. Or you might go all the way to a location based on the relatively minimal guidance of one of the other tools I just talked about, and be kind of hosed because you screwed up something, the timing or whatever. Or you can get actual real-world simulation through this program of the environment and plan things out far better. Also, none of the tools will simulate the Milky Way's presence in a composition. The planetary maps will show you its position. They won't let you see that in the context of the real environment you'll actually be in. That's up to your imagination or some photography from other sources that you might stitch together in your head. And that could all very well end up wrong if you don't have the right information or you haven't been there before. Now, this isn't to diminish the benefit of those other tools. I now routinely use them in conjunction with Flight Simulator because they can do a lot of things that the sim can't. And the location mapping is frequently embedded with useful data and information that Flight Simulator just doesn't have because they aren't primarily designed for another application, as Flight Sim is. My hope is that Microsoft and its co-developer, Asobo Studio, will release a version of this that's a dedicated tool for these other world simulation applications that I'm discussing without all the airplanes and aviation stuff. Though, in all candor, I'm a huge fan of that usefulness in what we do as well, because it allows you to explore and do things from a different fashion. And with some of the other capabilities that would round out its utility, such as the wayfinding and the labeling and things like that. Anyway, so again, what am I even talking about here? Let's start with the Grand Canyon, just to demo what this thing can do. If you're heading in that direction on a trip or a dedicated photo expedition and would like to know whether you can do some Milky Way photography, or use the moon to illuminate the canyon at night, or want to bead on the sunset and sunrise situations and where to go to get the best perspective, Flight Simulator 2020 will do that for you. You start your flight at the airport right by the South Rim Visitor Center, because that's where most people are going to end up, and you'll see that airport when you drive into the area. You might use a combination of slew mode or drone mode to get into position down at, say, the Visitor Center, or wherever you might want to be to try to get a good composition for sunrise, sunset, or the Milky Way with the canyon in the picture. That's a challenge to begin with because you might need some moonlight to help light up the canyon at night, or if you stretch your skills, you can get the canyon definition just by starlight alone. So anyway, you're in position. To see what the Milky Way is going to look like, you simply use the slider to move the time of day to nighttime. You'll see the stars emerge and the Milky Way as well. If the moon is out, the simulator accurately depicts its brightness based on its phase. So in this case, you can use it to gauge when you can balance moonlight to light the canyon, but have it not be so overwhelming that it would wash out the Milky Way. Now, when you first see the Milky Way, it'll look good, but not particularly bright. This is an accurate depiction of reality. It's what the human eye would see under good dark skies, but without a lot of dark adaptation from your eyes. Though 20 minutes of sitting there in darkness will certainly help your own eyes grasp more of that celestial view. But even then, it won't get you close to what a camera can capture thanks to its sensor and its lens. So to boost the brightness, to replicate what the camera will see, you go to the use keyboard controls and the Xbox hand controller buttons, which vary based on your keyboard that you might be using. So you look at the instructions on how to do that. And make adjustments to the exposure settings. So you lengthen the exposure and see it accurately replicates a longer exposure, bringing the Milky Way to much greater visibility and definition. And once you do that, you can play with the position to see when you want to be there and where you need to be to have, say, the bright center of the Milky Way in a good place relative to your foreground subject. Now, if it turns out that the moon is already up high and washing out the Milky Way, you can adjust the time to before or after the moon is visible in the evening or morning, or to a different date when it's not up, or when it rises later in the night, and then potentially time your visit for those conditions. You can see the impact of the moon on the night sky with extreme clarity. You can see how much time you'll get before the moon rises and how much of an impact lingering sunlight will generate after sunset and before sunrise. Now, of course, this is the view that I'm showing you here from the visitor center. And the point I've been making over and over with these videos is that the flight simulator also helps you find all the other perspectives that aren't familiar to people or readily accessible. So you can skim along the South Rim in drone mode and find alternative perspectives that you can hike to, or rent an ATV, or rent a helicopter, or rent a donkey. The point is that you can find new spots all on your own and it's on you to figure out how to get there. The sim will show you when and why to seek those places out, but then the rest is up to you. Now, you also have to remember that from the northern hemisphere, the Milky Way is at its most photogenic when looking toward the south, which is where the galactic center is. So from the south rim of the Grand Canyon, the view of the Milky Way isn't going to be great. It's going to be okay because you're looking to the north, but not spectacular because you're not looking to the south. Now, before we solve that problem, I want to show you one important little detail about the moon. When you are out shooting the moon, it's really super easy to overexpose it and get this bright blob. And this program actually accurately depicts that effect. If your exposure is too long, it's going to be this incoherent, undefined blob up in the sky. But if you zoom in on it and you start to reduce the exposure setting, the moon will suddenly come into focus. It will darken a little bit and you can see the details on the surface of the moon. Now, you also lose the stars that surround it because they don't have enough exposure time to be bright. But this is important because it shows how accurately this thing is functioning in almost all lighting aspects. The way you can dial in the moon's brightness and exposure and get something that actually looks like what you'd see at the camera when you're shooting the moon. Okay, so back to the Milky Way and the North-South Rim thing. Really, to capture a fantastic shot of the Milky Way in the Grand Canyon, you need to be on the north side looking south from the North Rim, and most likely the visitor center over there, although there are other spots and locations you can get to easily by car or on foot to vary it up a little bit. So in this app, you can quickly just slew over the canyon and plop yourself down at the North Rim Visitor Center, though some hunting might be necessary, and you should consult a map to get a bead on its direction from the South Rim. And then boom, you're looking at the south. It's easy here, but of course, in reality, it's a 200-mile drive from the South Rim to the North Rim. So using Flight Simulator like this will help you decide where to go and what to do if you're after specific things photographically. You can say, okay, you know what, I need to go to the North Rim and not screw around with the South Rim. Of course, remember that this is just an example, and you can use this to gauge the Milky Way's presence in anywhere. Monument Valley, Joshua Tree, a lighthouse at the ocean, whatever. But it happens that I just visited the North Rim on a cross-country drive last month and used Flight Simulator to get a sense of what perspective would be best. I just slewed over, saw the visitor center of the North Rim, was able to gauge the moon's presence and impact for the date I was planning to be there, and then went out and took a crack at it. This is what I got, and it's actually what I consider to be my best Milky Way shot yet, with starlight actually illuminating the canyon floor with no help from the moon, enough for it to register on my Sony A7R III sensor. The conditions were pristine there, and I'm thrilled with this result. Now, another quick point I'd like to make is that the sim also accurately shows light pollution. You can see hints of it in the Grand Canyon images, where the South Rim kind of shows there. Glows at the horizon. But to drive the point home, I started a flight in Lancaster, California, which is about an hour and change north of Los Angeles, where you can easily see here that the Milky Way is dimmer at the same time that we just saw it at the Grand Canyon, and there's pronounced sky glow in the direction of Los Angeles to the south. So to continue this exploration, I also leapt over there to LAX and started a flight right down on the runway, hopped out, so to speak, and tried to capture the Milky Way. It's much less bright than it was at Lancaster and, of course, the Grand Canyon. It's invisible, basically, in the default camera exposure settings, and even when you boost those up, it'd be still really washed out with a longer exposure. I suspect it might be a hair more visible in the sim than in real life, but this is still a great simulation of urban sky glow's impact on the Milky Way. So getting back to that road trip I took back in August, it had me in several places where I was able to experiment with the simulator's utility for this stuff. This includes my visit to Rocky Mountain National Park, where I used it on an Asus G14 gaming laptop, which is a compact, portable rig, really small laptop, whose specs I'll list down below. And it ran the sim beautifully, even with the offline mode, allowing it to run at reduced resolution detail. And it still proved very helpful even then. Now, I wanted to see what sort of imaging opportunities Bear Lake, for instance, offered. So I loaded up, and Bear Lake is a pretty famous sort of hiking destination in the park. So I loaded up a little flight/photo excursion into the sim, but this time focusing on the sun's position for a sunrise or sunset shoot. I started at Elk Park Ranch Airport, which is a grass strip about 20 miles southeast of Estes Park, which is where I was staying. And I use the slew mode to bounce up from the airstrip if I'm not interested in flying there manually myself, and then find Estes Park by heading roughly 300 degrees northwest-ish and finding the little town there. This is how you have to use this sim for visual exploration. It's not designed for this use. So the wayfinding is all rooted in aviation navigation techniques. And since there are no pop-up markers of towns and roads, you have to use it in conjunction with a map app or your own memory to find your way around. So I know that I have to take a certain compass heading from the airstrip to reach Estes Park, and then from there I use a map or my own memory to find where to enter Rocky Mountain National Park and then follow the road to Bear Lake. So that's via Route 36. You pass the Beaver Meadows Visitor Center right here, then you cut left onto Bear Lake Road and follow that bit of curvy asphalt all the way to its terminus at the lake. Now, fortunately, there aren't that many roads in Rocky Mountain National Park, so it was easy to do this. But oh, by the way, if you continue on 36, you would enter Trail Ridge Road, which is the highest road in the park, and in fact, the highest paved road in the United States at about 12,000 feet. And I also went up there in both the sim and in real life to shoot. But anyway, I made it to Bear Lake and began experimenting with different perspectives and times of day. And sure enough, if you get it just right, you can have a cool composition with the mountains being illuminated from the east. So I went there the next morning and got this, what I consider to be a pretty lovely shot of Bear, with the reflections in the lake and the mountains in the background, the sun hitting the trees just so. But let's say Bear is also a bit too familiar and maybe an overplayed social media darling, and you want to find other places in Rocky Mountain National Park to shoot. Obviously, I totally encourage people to be out doing this location scouting and exploration on foot, in person, in their cars, and don't mean to suggest that the sim should replace the natural exploration that's so gratifying and enriching in places like this. Having said that, if you only have a few days in the park, or if weather has you grounded for a few days, or again, if you're up against those time and budget constraints, you can use this to explore a myriad of other options before you even get there. For instance, when I finished up with Bear Lake, I returned to my aircraft, which is waiting patiently a few hundred feet above, and then just start flying around or slewing around. And you quickly notice that, of course, Rocky Mountain National Park is filled with lakes and outcrops and features and viewpoints that aren't necessarily accessible via car or convenient parking lot, as it is with Bear, but they're still equally interesting potential compositions. Now, over here, for instance, while flying around, I noticed that there's a little thing called Emerald Lake down there. And by my estimation, that looks like it's about an hour-long hike from Bear. And when you spot that, you get down to ground level with the drone. You can see that it indeed offers lots of new potential despite being a relative stone's throw from Bear Lake. So you dip down there, check it out, see what the sun does at different times of day, which angles and views are best at sunset and sunrise, etc. Then perhaps consider just mounting up some gear and making a morning of it, or grabbing it at sunset and making your way back with a headlamp. The point is, you can use this to find a new perspective all on your own. Sort out whether they're optimal, what time of day, and what parts are in shadow and what parts aren't, etc. As shown earlier, you can also figure out when and where the Milky Way is at that location and how strong the moon's impact will be, etc. But what if you want to try something that's really far out, like a different sort of composition, or actually in this case, it's quite a bit closer than the sun and the Milky Way, by playing around with the moon in your photography. I do that quite a bit in my own work, and in fact captured this image of the moon behind the Empire State Building in New York City on July 4th this year, right before the fireworks. So I was curious whether the sim could have been used to plan a shot like that. So for this one, we start off from Newark Airport or Teterboro and slew over to the popular viewing spot in Weehawken, which New Yorkers will instantly recognize. Get down to street level, start aiming toward where the full moon will rise, and then you hit the sliders to adjust the time of day and date so you actually get the moon rising. The shot I took was on July 4th, so that's easy to remember, but this is where I also ran into a little bug with the program, well, two actually. First, the date seems to be off by a full day, as this is showing the moon in position behind the Empire State Building on July 5th, not 4th. Now, I notified Microsoft of this error, and hopefully they'll be able to fix the algorithms that caused it. The other little glitch is that if you set up a time and date, the second you touch the time slider, it'll revert back to your present date, which is pretty annoying. But again, hopefully they'll fix that, though perhaps there's some logic behind it that I'm not grasping and has nothing to do with photography, but with aviation. Anyway, the point is that you can use this to compose really good shots of the moon or the setting and rising sun with incredible precision. The scale's off a bit, although it may not be. It kind of depends on what lens and what zoom and what your position actually is. But the geometry is spot on. as could be the timing, assuming they fix that glitch. Finally, let's take a quick spin around Ayers Rock in Australia. I'm using this to show how you can find optimal compositions with the Milky Way with objects that rise above ground level, unlike at the Grand Canyon, which of course is a whole lot of down. Here at Ayers, you can rotate all the way around the rock, get in tight, look at all the options, find stuff like the small and large Magellanic Clouds, which are these two puffy galaxies over here, which you can only see from the southern hemisphere, and even gauge how the moon will light up the rock based on its elevation in the sky and its phase. This accurately shows the degree of illumination and where the shadows fall at night under the moon's glow. That's pretty stunning, and I'm sure you can see how useful this is. And in fact, I'm even coming up with new alternative uses for this, such as planning commando raids and trying to figure out if the moon's going to blow your cover. But anyway, that's it. Microsoft Flight Simulator, in my view, it's an incredibly helpful way of predicting the position and impact of the Milky Way, the sun, and the moon on the terrestrial environment, and thus on your photography or videography or whatever. Now, I hope this video inspires you to check out the sim and see if it might be useful for what you're up to as a visual artist or a creator. And by the way, I haven't been paid by Microsoft or Asobo to say any of this. It's all my own exploration of the software's potential and how I think it can benefit what I do. And I'm just sharing that with you, and hopefully you can benefit from it too. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and have a great day.